Alrighty. Good morning. I'm sorry. I'm used to doing morning things. Alrighty. Good evening, everybody. Well, at least for those of you who are on my side of the world. So, good evening to all of you. It is a blessing and a pleasure to be here. Let me just send this out to let people know that we are here. Alrighty. So, good evening, everyone. It is, as I said, it's a wonderful blessing to see everyone here, and welcome to everyone who is listening and who is joining us today. So, that being said, I do want to say I am the King's Bard. You can find me on Facebook, YouTube, and on Twitch. I do these streams 4 times a week, and so, well, 3 times on Saturdays and once on Monday nights. And so, yes, it's very good to see you. If this is your first time here, very, very welcome to you. And of course, please, if you are new, if you haven't seen me before, then please do hit that like button. And if you're on Facebook, then also hit the like button on my page as well, The King's Bard. You can find me there. You can also find me on YouTube. And once again, if you're there, then you can hit that like button and also subscribe and hit that notification bell as well to see me. So, and to get more videos of all this sort. Now, before we do anything else, of course, today we are going over diet, and that's such an important topic, and I really, really can't wait to get in because there's a whole lot of misconceptions about that. But that being said, of course, for those of you who don't know me, I am a health and lifestyle educator as well as an herbalist, and also as someone who believes in holistic health, I am a Christian, and I believe that that is something that is very important. And so, that being said, we're going to open up with a word of prayer, and we will dive right on in to this presentation. So let's go ahead and bow our heads. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for your grace, for your mercy, for your love, and for your wonderful kindness. I just ask, Lord, that you would please be with us and speak, that you would lead us to see exactly what your plan is for our diet, because this is so important. Thank you again, Lord, for everything that you have done. In the name of Jesus Christ, we pray and ask that you would lead now, and thank you so much. Amen. Alrighty. So that being said, we're going to go ahead and dive right on in. Actually, before I say anything else here, I do want to give of course, the usual disclaimer. I wasn't able to get it in the slides in time, but the disclaimer, of course, is that the information in this presentation is not intended for the diagnosis, treatment, prevention, or cure of any disease. If you want to, make any changes to your lifestyle or implement any remedies or anything like natural remedies or anything like that, please consult with your physician first before doing so. Really important. It's just the wise thing to do. That being said, we're going to start off with diet. This is a question, a problem that honestly, there's been so many different, how shall I say, so many different concepts and ideas of what a healthy diet is. There's been so many out there. I've talked about this before on my channel. If you want to, I actually do have fact versus fads in my channel as before. How can you tell a health fact versus a health fad? So please do check that out. It's a really important video. It's really, really important to get out. So that being said, what is the healthiest diet? This is something that's really, really important for us to know. And being, coming at it from a Christian perspective, the answer is very clear in Genesis chapter 1, verse 29. What was mankind created to eat? Well, Genesis 1:29 basically says that every fruit tree which yields fruit, and every herb that yields seed, these I have given you for food. Now, that's a paraphrase of what it says, but if you go and read it, that's pretty much what it says. So grasses that yield seed, because that's what the word herb, that's translated in the King James at least, it's translated as herb or plant, but it really is the Hebrew word for grass more specifically. So a grass bearing seed, well, that's grains. And then fruit trees, fruit, everything that gives fruit, all the, fruit and grains, those are the fruit, those were the foods that were given for mankind. And only a little bit later on, it was vegetables after the fall of man. So vegetables are also there, and they're an important component. But fruits and grains, those are the basic components of the human diet, at least as we were designed to eat. And then after that, vegetables, and then much later, you had meat that was permitted. Not that it was, and it was kind of an emergency situation too. This isn't really a Bible study on health and healthy diet and things like that. Just more to say that if you really look into it, yes, meat is permitted, but generally speaking, meat is permitted in emergency situations, as it was only permitted in an emergency situation when all the crops and plant life had died after the flood. And if you want to check that out, that's in Genesis chapter 9. So, yes, flesh foods are permitted, but it is generally best that whole fruits, whole grains, and whole vegetables, those are the diet that we were created to eat, a whole foods, plant-based diet. This is the ideal for humankind. Therefore, any diet that corresponds with the scriptures, and let me shrink myself down here so that you guys can see the information, any diet that corresponds with the Bible is going to be accurate. Now, that being said, there are a few caveats here. There are some diets that do propose these ideas, and generally they stick with it, but they will tell you, okay, well, steer clear of things that are not bad to eat, even that fit with this principle. I think of, for example, the alkaline diet, or any one of the low-carb diets, keto, is an example. And I don't, by the way, when I mention these diets, I am not attacking or speaking against anybody who advocates it or against anyone who actually practices these things. I will mention several fad diets and several things like that throughout. And I am speaking against the diets and the principles exclusively. I'm not talking against any individuals or any individual people. I'm only speaking against the concepts and ideas that are promulgated out there that give either some slightly false information or either unintentionally or intentionally. There are, but that's very rare that it's intentional. Generally speaking, it's false information that, it's either a little bit, sometimes there's a whole lot. It all depends. If you really want to know kind of the difference between the, fact and fad and how to tell that, again, check out my video on that. Check out my presentation on that. So any diet which corresponds to the scripture is accurate. But now the question then comes, what does a whole food plant-based diet mean? We really should ask that question after all. It's an important question. And that's what we're going to look at. A whole food plant-based diet. First, whole foods. What is a whole food? Well, a whole food is a food that has been processed as little as possible. So a good example that that is in everyday life for most people is oatmeal versus Cheerios. Cheerios are made from oatmeal. Of course, they, you can see this on the box. They talk about how it's made with oats and it's got all this soluble fiber and everything, and that's not wrong. Oatmeal, or Cheerios, is made from oats, and it does have a lot of dietary fiber. There's nothing wrong with that, and especially soluble fiber. But Cheerios are not as good as just regular unprocessed oatmeal, because what's happened with the Cheerios is that they've been ground up into a very, very, very fine paste, right? They've been essentially ground up into a paste and then puffed up into little rings. They've been extruded, so it's been kind of put through I don't even know how to exactly describe it, but it's been squeezed through a really small hole, basically, and puffed up with air to make it the consistency that it is. Whereas just oatmeal, even if you're eating rolled oatmeal, all it is just steamed and then flattened, rolled. That's it. So there's a lot less processing going on. So a whole food would be something more like oatmeal, not so much Cheerios. So if you wanted to go for a whole foods plant-based diet, then oatmeal would be your way to go. Not so much Cheerios. That's not a whole food. It is. I'll grant you though, Cheerios are better than many cereals out there. I'll give you that. That is very true. Oh, I forgot to mention. If you have questions at any point, please feel free to ask. If you're watching the recorded videos, so after the stream is over, then you can still leave your questions in the comment section. And if you are watching in the stream live, then go ahead and leave your questions. At any point, I will do my best to answer them. It may be, I believe there's a little bit of a delay on what you're seeing and what I'm saying, so the question may come as a little bit of a delay. And I believe I do have a Q&A session at the end of this video. So if you do want to check that out, if you have any questions or anything like that, please feel free to do that then. Yes. And again, another example, an apple, not apple crumb cake, right? These are, an apple just as it is way better for you than apple crumb cake. Now, most people aren't going to say that apple crumb cake is your serving of fruit for the day. Just like an apple pie probably isn't as much. Depends on how you make it, because there's nothing wrong with fruit pies. I love pie. There's diet and health is something that is a lot more flexible than people realize, even with healthy food. So it's just a matter of recognizing that and acknowledging what's healthy, what's not healthy, and sticking to certain principles, and we'll talk about that. Now, the reason why we want whole food is because it ensures that you're getting as many nutrients out of your food as possible. This is because the more processing you put a food through, the less nutrition that you ultimately get out of it, and the more calories you get out of it. And this is because the processing that we tend to do, well, a lot of times we get rid of things that we don't necessarily like. For example, whole wheat versus white. This is something that, a lot of people know, oh, whole wheat is healthier. But maybe not as many people know why, and it's because we like the uniform and light consistency of white bread. This is something that, it's something that's a lot of people like. I happen to dislike it. I just don't like the uniformity of white bread. It just doesn't, and it's too, how shall I say it? It's too squishy. It just isn't good. At least in my opinion, but that's because I've actually been living off of very, very good whole wheat bread for quite some time now. But when it comes to white versus whole wheat, what's happened is the whole wheat has something called bran. And bran is kind of like the outer casing of the actual wheat grain. And we can't actually digest it, but it's full of fiber, and it does have a ton of minerals. The problem is, right, that when you knock the bran off, because, it's indigestible, it's kind of rough and coarse, and if you do things, wrong, or if you don't quite make it right, then bran can make a very, very, I don't know, it's not as soft or pleasant textured, especially if you do it wrong, as you would with white bread. The problem is that the bran, when you knock off the bran is attached to the germ of the wheat kernel. And of course, the germ of the wheat kernel is where most of the nutrition is. And so you knock that off with the bran, and you're left with just the endosperm, which is part of the it's mainly just starch and a little bit of protein. So you don't really have a whole lot of nutrition, which is why then enriched flour exists, and why all white bread products, at least in the United States, or virtually all of them, I actually can't think of any white bread products that this isn't the case, but all white flour products, to my knowledge, have to be enriched with nutrition because you've taken out most of it. And so the idea is, right, oh, well, you knock off, 80% of the nutrition and add 20% back, right? Oh yeah, but it's enriched, right? So it's really, really important that we try our best to get as many nutrients out of our food as possible. In other words, as little processing as you possibly can get. And not just, this isn't just the case with nutrients either. There are also other chemicals that can prove very, very useful. And this is actually something that's unique to plant foods, by the way. Animal foods do not have these. They're called phytochemicals. Now, as an herbalist, this is a very, how shall I say, this is something that, unfortunately, modern medicine doesn't quite know what to do with. They say, oh yeah, these may help, but we don't really want to put them to the test, because if we did and people realized, oh, we don't have to go to, the pharmacy or these other things to get these expensive medications. We can just, go to the local supermarket and pick stuff up, or we can, go to the tea section and pick something up. Honestly, we have enough funding. Bit of a sidetrack here, but just let me speak here. We have enough funding in this country, and in America, we have enough funding where if we were to put, if we were really to want to prove that herbal medicines work and herbal things like that work, then we could, if we really wanted to. The reason we don't, it's economics. There's just no money in it. Why not? Because you cannot put a patent on a flower or a leaf. You just can't do it. And so because of that, you can't make gobs and gobs and gobs of money off of it. And so it doesn't really, work for the kind of thing that we're doing. And it's very unfortunate. And because modern medicine, because of history, the history of medicine and things like that, which we are covering in Sacred History. So if you want to check that out, I do have a couple of history of medicine things. So far, we're going to continue doing that. That's on Saturdays at 10 o'clock in the morning. So please do check that out, Pacific Standard Time. 10 o'clock a.m. Pacific Standard Time for Sacred History. We're going over the history of natural medicine. So please do check that out. Anyway, back on track here. Phytochemicals are really important. These are things that they're not nutritious necessarily. They're not something that you need to survive. But these chemicals are chemicals that they do things in your body other than just help you survive. Antioxidants are an example of a group of these particular kinds of chemicals. You also have other active components. For example, in garlic and onions, you have sulfur compounds. These aren't antioxidants, but they really have a powerful effect on the immune system. They're antibiotic, antiviral, and other things too. As I like to say, garlic is antimicrobial. It's antibacterial, it's antifungal, it's antiviral, it's antisocial. It's something that it has a lot of. It's very chemically potent, and not just because of its nutrition, but because of other chemicals in there besides its nutrients. And that's what phytochemicals are. And again, these are the reasons that herbal remedies work. It's again because you have these chemicals in plants that have actions on the human body. And again, this is something that is totally unique to plant foods. No animal food has anything like this. It just doesn't have anything like this. Animal foods do not have chemicals that have beneficial effects. All animal foods have, any chemicals that animal foods have that are in the food itself from the animal that are not nutritious are waste products. Things like uric acid, which is very, very much so, often offal, or rather refuse, or not, what's the term I'm looking for? Dung. I'll just be frank. Uric acid, excrement. There we go. That's a better way to put it. And other things like that. Of course, you've got diseases and tons of bacteria as well, like cancer is a big one in there as well. Those are all things that animal foods have that, generally speaking, plant foods either don't have or just flat out can't have. So it's really important to, cholesterol, that's another one. That's not a waste product, but plant foods don't have cholesterol either. So, because they don't have a liver. Alrighty. So, uh, and again, these are also not found in processed foods. The more you process something, the less powerful it becomes, and the more you process a plant food, the less powerful it becomes, the less phytochemicals are in there, and sadly, this is also true, by the way, for herbal supplements. If you have a supplement that's contained in a pill, something like that, it's not as powerful as if you put it in, generally. It's not as powerful as if you just have it as the whole herb, and it's not as beneficial as if you have it as the whole herb, generally speaking. Now, there are exceptions to this. For example, aspirin is better for you than salicylic acid. It's much more pleasant to take, doesn't have as many of the unpleasant side effects, and it is safer as well, generally speaking, for internal use. That being said, and also digioxin or digitoxin is better than foxglove. It's safer. Again, it doesn't have the dosing. If you don't know what you're doing, the dosing can be tricky and very, very deadly to work with. And on top of that, standardization is difficult. Not so much with foxglove. With willow tree bark, yeah, it's a little hard. But with foxglove, yeah, it can be. It's not as difficult if you know what you're doing. But that being said, it also the processed stuff, the isolated chemical digioxin or digitoxin has much less unpleasant side effects as well. So there are exceptions to that, but they're very, very, very rare. Generally speaking, the whole plant, the whole food, or the whole herb is much better than the individual. And this is something I've addressed before as well when talking about herbal remedies here. But I'm going to stop getting off on tangents, and we're going to start looking at plant-based, because we've got a lot of ground to cover and not very much time. So, plant-based foods. You know, we looked at whole foods, a whole foods diet, but now plant-based. Well, what does plant-based mean? Well, this means that the vast majority of the diet should come from plants, not from animals. This, in fact, the whole diet should really come from plants, not from animals. I have been vegan for 7 years now, nearly 8 years now, and so haven't, and even before then I was mostly vegetarian. So, and, you know, there was the occasional thing, but it was a very rare occurrence that I would eat meat. And there are plenty of people out there who have never touched an animal product a day in their life. And so it's really important to recognize that, hey, you know what? These things are not essential. We don't need animal products. That is an absolute myth that has been pushed for a long time. It's just simply not true. We don't need animal products. And so the vast majority of our diet must come from plants, not from animals. Animal foods have been more consistently linked with more diseases than any other dietary factor. Animal protein is the worst offender. Animal protein has been linked with more diseases more conclusively than smoking has been linked with lung cancer. It is absolutely astonishing just how much research has been done on this, and yet how consistently people just simply do not accept it. There's plenty of people. I have gotten some tweets, man. I have seen some things a number of years ago, or not a number, several years ago now. It's been, I think, well, last decade it was anyway. The World Health Organization came out and said, hey, you know what? Processed meats and things like that are, you know, processed meats and red meats are carcinogenic. They cause cancer. This is not a, okay, maybe they cause cancer, or they possibly cause cancer, or they probably cause cancer. No, they cause cancer, definite, no question. We know they cause cancer. And so, you know, these are things like bacon and sausage and beef and all that other stuff. I've got some tweets, man. Things like, you know, science discovers that bacon, the bacon causes cancer, and we face the fact that we're going to have to give up science, and things like that. Now there were some tweets on the other side too, although they were a bit tongue-in-cheek. You know, oh, hail your vegetarian overlords. But so, you know, the thing is, right, that, you know, unfortunately, there's been a lot of, resistance to this idea that animal foods are cause disease. This is something that has been consistently proven, and that the link is so incredibly consistent that it's just incredible that we even have people who argue against it. Now, I do understand correlation doesn't equal causation and things like that, but you could make the same argument for cigarettes and smoking, for smoking and lung cancer. Oh, well, people who, the correlation and whatnot doesn't necessarily, we don't necessarily know that. Well, we do. And so we even know how a lot of these foods cause disease. So it's really important for us to recognize that animal food causes these things. It's not just a if, and, maybe, possibly, probably. This is it does. And white meats and such are right after. They're not possibly cause cancer. They're also not do cause cancer. They're just, well, you know what? They probably cause cancer. So it's really important to recognize that. Animal foods have been consistently linked with disease, more so than any other dietary factor. It's incredible. In fact, on top of that, most food poisoning comes from animal foods. In fact, virtually all food poisoning has its origin in animal food products. Sure, yes, you might find E. coli, for example, on spinach or other leafy greens, but generally speaking, that is because, well, that's always because, well, you know where E. coli live, right? In the colon. That's why coli. That's why the species name is coli. And the thing is, plants don't have colons. So the reason that you'll find that there is because that spinach or that leafy green is grown on the same patches of land, or at least in the same farm nearby a cow field, a cattle ranch. And so it's grown on a cattle ranch or very close nearby, and you'll have runoff from the cattle ranch that has all this bacteria that will then wash over the leafy greens and infect them. So it's really, really important to recognize that, it still comes from... Now there are exceptions to this. Onions, for example. Onions can be dangerous. You can get food poisoning from them. I have gotten food poisoning from onions, but that's only because they have a tendency to suck germs out of the air, which is quite beneficial for you as a natural remedy, but it's not really beneficial for you if you want to eat onions and you've left them out for a couple hours. Yeah, not great. But other than that, most food poisoning comes straight out of animal foods. Plants have phytochemicals alongside other nutrients which can benefit the body in many ways, and this is something we talked about just a bit ago. Animal products do not have phytochemicals. They don't have anything akin to phytochemicals. That's something that's unique to plants, and plant foods are, and again, studies show it's very consistent with this, that plant foods are the way to go on this. So, moving on here. We're going to look at macronutrients. We're going to get a bit more into the science of nutrition here today, so this is something that is really, again, important, and it's to fight off any misconceptions or misunderstandings. And I'll talk a bit more about those that are going on right now. And again, I will be referencing studies done, and in particular the Blue Zone studies that have been done, as well as a couple of others. I think I'm just going to stick with the Blue Zone studies here. But we're going to look at those and kind of look at that. Macronutrients here. There are 3 macronutrients that give energy. There are 4 macronutrients total. Water is one of them. We've already talked about water, though, so I didn't put it on here. And there are 3 macronutrients, things that you need to survive in great numbers that give you energy. There are 3 of those. The first one is carbohydrates. The second one is fats, and the third one is proteins. These 3 macronutrients are the only macronutrients that give you energy. They're not the only sources of energy. Alcohol is also a source of energy, but you don't need alcohol to survive, although there are some people who might disagree with that. And to those people, I would say you might want to get yourself checked out by a doctor. Anyway, there are 3 macronutrients that give energy: carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. These things, these three are essential to your survival, and yes, all of them are essential. You need all of them to survive. And this is really, really important because there's a lot of misinformation, especially about the first, actually about all of them. Each one has a basic role in the body, and each is essential for everyday functioning, and we'll go over each one of them. First of all, carbohydrates. There are two types of carbohydrates. There are simple carbs and complex carbs. Simple carbohydrates are, just to put it bluntly, sugars. These have one or two sugars linked together, one sugar or two sugars linked together. Those are simple carbs. These are things like honey, molasses, table sugar, agave syrup, and some others as well. These are the things that taste sweet when you eat them. Glucose as well, malt sugar, maltose, and yes, milk sugar as well. Lactose is also a carbohydrate. It's also the only animal product, by the way, that contains carbohydrates, milk. All other animal products simply do not have carbohydrates. The main function of simple carbohydrates is providing energy. These are your body's energy bars. They they burn very cleanly, very easily, and yeah, they're just the basic food source, or basic energy source for your entire body. And your brain uses simple carbs exclusively. In fact, more specifically, it burns glucose first, and pretty much nothing else. Carbohydrates run on, or the brain runs on carbohydrates exclusively. So if you have a low carb diet, your brain is not functioning ideally. It just, because it can't. It's impossible for it to do so. Now, when it comes to complex carbs, there are also two types of complex carbs. You have starches, which are long-lasting carbs. These are things that it's basically a bunch of simple carbohydrates, single sugars, chained together in one big old long chain. This is really important to know because starches, they're not the same thing as simple carbs. Simple carbs, these are things that are most often found in fruits and in very ripe fruits, especially very ripe bananas and things like that. Also in some vegetables, you do have sugars in there, like asparagus and broccoli. But that's because those are also starchy, and so you do have the breakdown of starch going down in there. And when starches break down, they become sugar. And that's important to know. Now, is that a bad thing? No, because remember, sugars are your basic kind of energy source. And so you need those starches in order to provide long-lasting and very sustainable, clean burning energy. This stuff burns the cleanest. The other two types of energy-giving nutrients, this is protein and fat, those two don't burn nearly half as clean. Well, I can't give an amount exactly. I'm not a biochemist, but they don't burn nearly as cleanly as carbohydrates do. And so it's really important to get enough carbs here, enough starch in your diet. Starch should be a huge component of your diet. There's also, however, fiber, and this helps keep the digestive system clean, strong, and efficient, and it also removes excesses of a bunch of different substances, including excess starches, excess cholesterol, and it also helps, of course, to get rid of any toxins that may be there, and it also helps to provide something for your digestive system to push on. Now, there are a lot of misconceptions about this. This fiber is actually incredibly important for when looking at things like diverticulosis, diverticulitis. There's a lot of misconceptions. The idea that you need to avoid beans and legumes and things like that is actually quite wrong. It's something that has been perpetuated since the 1920s when these things were understood. I had my great-grandfather had diverticulosis, and he was told, oh, well, you need to eat, again, this was, he was born in 1912, and so, this is that time period that I'm speaking of when modern medicine was still dosing out mercury and cocaine. And they told him, oh, well, you can't eat whole grain bread. You can't eat fruits. You can't eat vegetables, really. I mean, you can a little bit. But you have to, so you should eat things like white bread and ice cream and these other things. And so he had probably the worst diet that you can possibly imagine. Um, he still lived to be 93 because he had strong genes. Imagine how old he would have lived if he hadn't had a diet like that his whole life. And so, diverticulosis is actually, with diverticulosis, and you really need those high fiber foods to really get in there. And if you want to, see that, look at the Mayo Clinic. They advocate that. So it's, I'm not just saying that here. The Mayo Clinic says, hey, look, guys, this is really important. And of course, you can check out other studies on that as well. It's really important to recognize this, and one of the reasons it may also help to prevent those things, because fiber can help possibly to prevent diverticulosis and diverticulitis, because it keeps your digestive system, especially your colon, working nice and cleanly. It provides something to push against, and it's just, it is really good for you. So yeah, that fiber is really, really important. Let's see here. And all carbs, and I did this here, all carbohydrates have 4 calories per gram. Now, that may not mean very much to you, but that means essentially that for every amount of carb, that you have 4 calories for every gram of carbohydrates. So if you look on, let's see here, nutrition label, this isn't that's green, never mind. Okay, that's not gonna work. Oh man, I have a thing of candied ginger here, it's not just me. This isn't my computer desk, but I'll have it once in a while. Candied ginger is okay, but when it comes to these things here, I think I won't bother with that. So when you look on a nutrition label and you count the carbs on it, right? Hey, guess what? It's got, you can actually calculate the amount of calories that are coming from those carbs. It's really cool. Now, I want to touch on a little bit more with carbohydrates here. Carbohydrates are the body's fuel. Kind of mentioned that already. Now, if you look at the blue zone studies, these were studies looking at the longest living people groups in the world. All of them, every single one of those groups has the majority of its diet being carbohydrates, and more specifically, starch. The lowest was 55%, and the highest was like 80% of their diet. In fact, one of them, 72%, in Okinawa, 72% of the diet of all the centenarians there, 72%, nearly 3/4 of their whole diet, was nothing but purple sweet potatoes. That's it. 72% of their diet was nothing but purple sweet potatoes, and another 8% of that was rice. And so, of all of their carbohydrate-based foods, starch consisted of 80% of their diet. That's astonishing. And again, the lowest was in Sardinia, I think it was, or I forget. Was it Sardinia? With 55% of its diet being from starches and complex carbohydrates. So it's really, really significant, the number. And so based on that, I say your diet should be 50 to 80% carbohydrates. Now, you really should have a diversity of these things, don't get me wrong, but the diet should be anywhere from 50 to 80% carbohydrates. I really personally say around 75% is what I advocate for. Now, again, this isn't just starch here that I'm speaking of. I'm speaking of not only starch, but also simple sugars and fiber here. So there's a lot more to it than that. But the nice thing is, right, when it comes to starch, you've got so many sources of starch, and most of them are also very good sources of fiber if you have them in a whole food fashion. So not French fries here, but baked potatoes or boiled potatoes, things like that, those things are full of fiber. A lot of people seem to think that potatoes are, spawned of the devil himself, and that's absolutely not the case. White potatoes are not bad for you when eaten properly. Not as French fries, not as chips, not as any of that stuff. And if you're coming from the UK, not as crisps either. That stuff is, let's just be honest, the UK or Ireland, I guess. Um, that's not a whole food. Your diet should be 50 to 80% whole food carbohydrates. This is, yes, starch, but also uh, fiber and simple sugars as well. So you're looking at fruit on top of that. And again, starch is the single major fuel source for the body, or at least it should be. And people are discovering this, even weightlifters, bodybuilders, things like that. People who are bodybuilders who use, I've heard some testimonies of these people who are these big old bodybuilders and, who have won these incredible competitions, and they were, they had all the high protein, foods that is very common in that area and that particular, thing. And then they switched to a whole foods plant-based diet with a high starch emphasis. And they said, man, I thought I could do stuff before. And then I went to this diet and I've never had this much energy. I can do so much. I have way more endurance. It's just, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to, I don't know. Why didn't I do this before? And, they're stronger, they're healthier, they're fitter. And yeah, starch is the major fuel source for the body. What should they expect, right? This is something that, unfortunately, there's a lot of misconception about. And again, you do also need plenty of fiber. You don't want to neglect starch, put starch in over the fiber. You don't just eat, you don't just take like a potato without the skin and fry it up and eat it, right? No. And this is something, again, when I make mashed potatoes, when I make potato soup or anything, I don't peel potatoes, man. I never peel them. Why? Why would you? A lot of the stuff that's really good is in the peel. So, hey, go for it, And again, lots of fiber, and it's very satisfying. I just made a big old potato soup here yesterday for the whole week. Huge, huge pot of potato soup. And man, I tell you, it is filling. It's really good, too. And, I don't have to worry so much about that. Now, obviously, if you don't have a metabolism like mine, you may need smaller portion sizes than me. But again, that's not the point. It's, the portion sizes are something else. But when it comes, that's still a good example of healthy food. And it didn't just have potatoes in it. It also had onions and carrots and other things like that. But those are also somewhat starchy. And again, I want to say simple sugar shouldn't be the bulk of the diet. So if you have lots of honey, lots of molasses, although very few people like molasses for some reason, I don't know why not. At least very few of the people that I know like molasses. I don't know why not. It's perfectly fine. I mean, it is a little strong, but hey, it's a good source of iron, very good source of iron, and yeah, so, Anyway, moving on here to fats. Fats, there are, again, two kinds of fat, and it's really important to know that. Most people do, though, and most people know, saturated fat, well, that's the bad fat. Unsaturated fat, that's the good fat. Saturated fats, these stimulate cholesterol production. They also last longer, and they're the thing that generally makes things more flaky, things like that. These are things like coconut oil. Yes, coconut oil is a saturated fat, so is palm oil, but also all animal fat, virtually all animal fat, with the exception of fish oils. Those are all, animal fats are almost exclusively saturated fats. Butter, lard, tallow, let's see what else. Suet is also that. So all of those are saturated fats. And these stimulate cholesterol production. And of course, if it's an animal fat, it also has cholesterol in it. And more specifically, oxidizing cholesterol. And that's where it's really bad. Non-oxidized cholesterol is actually not that bad for you, but oxidized cholesterol is horrendous for you. There was an interesting study done on that. I don't have the reference to that, though, because I lost my book that had it. I wish I knew where it was. Anyway, now, our body can make saturated fats from unsaturated fats, and I'll get more into that later. Unsaturated fats, meanwhile, there's two kinds of those as well. Polyunsaturated fats, these are essential. You cannot live without polyunsaturated fats. But all the other kinds of fats, saturated fats and the other kind of unsaturated fat, monounsaturated fat, the body can make both of those from polyunsaturated fats. Monounsaturated fats, these are not essential, but they are still better than saturated fats. However, they do have a tendency to spoil much more quickly than either saturated or polyunsaturated fats. Because if you imagine them all as chains, saturated fats have no weak links. Monounsaturated fats have one weak link. That's mono, one, singular. And poly, or multiple. So polyunsaturated fats have a bunch of weak links, which means they actually are a lot stronger. Yeah. Now, when it comes to calories, fat has 9 calories per gram. So you're going to want to limit your fat consumption. But it depends, too, on what your situation is like. And we'll talk about that here in half a tick. Fats are mostly used for energy storage, for insulation, and for cushioning. This is very much the case here for, well, pretty much everything. Omega fatty acids, these are the polyunsaturated fats, and these are essential. Omega-3s and omega-6s. Those are, you've probably heard of those. The best sources of omega fatty acids are not fish. There's a huge misconception, unfortunately, that's gotten all over the world here. And it's really sad. EPA and DHA. Some of you have probably not, most of you may or may not have heard of that. Some of you might, especially if you're more interested in health. But a lot of people may not know. EPA is a particular kind of omega-3. It's a different form. EPA and DHA are different forms of omega-3 fatty acids. There is another form, however, and that's ALA, or alpha-linoleic acid, or alpha-linolenic. I forget which one it is. It's been a while. I don't remember the exact names, but suffice to say, there's animal versions as well, or there's animal versions and plant versions. Now, omega-3s from the animal versions, those are the EPA and DHA. But you know what's interesting? That's what's in fish. But you know what's really interesting? The fish don't make those. You know where they get them? They get them from the seaweed, from plants. So if you really want EPA or DHA, get it from the plants. Get it from the seaweed. Well, actually, those aren't plants. Those are algae. But suffice it to say, they didn't make it. Okay, those things don't come from fish. Fish eat those things just like we do. They need those to survive just like we do. However, ALA, which is found in plants, especially flaxseed and chia seed, is perfectly fine and perfectly acceptable because, hey, guess what? All our body needs to get EPA and DHA is ALA and a few other components that are just nutritional in character that most sources of ALA and of ALA have. Most plant sources of ALA have. Hey, guess what? You've got EPA and DHA. So you don't need either one of those in your diet. Your body can make those just fine, thank you very much. So it's a huge myth, the idea, and I've seen this perpetuated a few times by people who seem to think that there's that you need those things to survive. Well, I mean, you do, but your body can make them from the plant sources. Oh, and also on top of that, flaxseed has like 3 times as much as salmon, something like that. Flaxseed has nearly 5 grams of omega-3 oil. That is nuts per serving. That's absolutely phenomenal. It's like 4.5 grams of omega-3 per serving of flaxseed. And chia seed is the next closest, and it's like 2.5 grams. A lot of fish is just like 600 milligrams, so it's not even a gram. So, once again, flaxseed and chia seed, the plant sources are much, much better for you. And on top of that, both of those are great sources of soluble fiber, which again, if you're looking for either brain health or heart health, that's still the better thing, because fiber is really good for clearing out the circulation, clearing out the cholesterol, and it also is really good with those carbohydrates for crossing the blood-brain barrier to get that stuff into where your body, or into where your brain needs those things to function, to incorporate into the myelinated sheaths and things like that in the brain, in the neurons. And so, yeah, the plant sources are better for you than anything, and you don't need to eat them from animals. But even if you did feel like you needed EPA or DHA, you can still get that from seaweed, and you won't have to worry about the mercury or other things that are concentrated in the fish, on top of the fact that it's animal protein, and that's just not good for you. And in fact, fish are not the best or the healthiest sources of any of those fats. Now, that being said, fat should not be the major source of your calories. Most people know that. There's a bit of an animosity towards fats recently because they're so high in calorie. But they are essential to some degree, so you do need them. So fats should really make up around 10 to 15% of your diet. Now this depends, the amount exactly depends on really your circumstances. Generally speaking, you want a lower fat if you're having cardiovascular issues, or if you're worried about having cardiovascular issues. Your fat intake should be generally towards the 10%. In fact, Dr. Esselstyn and some others as well here in the United States, when they're treating cardiac patients, they say 10% of your diet, no more than that, absolutely strict. The reason, well, because the more fat you have, the more cholesterol you're likely going to build up, and that just causes, and blood triglycerides and all that sort of a thing as well, and that just creates a whole lot of problems. So lower fat is generally better if you have cardiovascular issues. So if you have heart issues and you're using a lot of olive oil, you're not going to be doing yourself any favors. Even though olive oil is definitely an improvement on like lard or butter, you still want to kind of pulling away from that added oil. It's just not the best thing. On the other hand, though, if you're dealing with mental issues, then you're going to want a higher fat diet. Now, if you're dealing with both, somewhere in the middle, right? Higher fat, and again, studies have shown this, and this is something that Dr. Neil Nedley uses in his depression anxiety recovery program, the most successful treatment program for depression and anxiety that exists at the moment, because it's evidence-based and lifestyle-based. It looks at these things as lifestyle issues rather than just genetic things, because they're not just genetic. And if you want to know more about that, no affiliation, by the way. Hit up the Nedley 10-hit hypothesis, Google that, and depressionthewayout.com. Again, those are great resources, no affiliation to me whatsoever, except that I was originally trained years and years ago by Dr. Nedley in the depression recovery program for the distance learning part, or for the community program, but that has long expired, and so so again, higher fat, this is something that you're generally going to want to use for mental issues. Lower fat is generally better for cardiovascular issues. Now we're going to go to proteins here, and I think I accidentally missed some things, so I'm going to go over them if I think of them here. Protein is made up of smaller chemicals called amino acids. These are the building blocks of protein, and proteins, basically, to give you an idea of what proteins are, amino acids are basically pieces of string. And a protein is basically a bunch of those pieces of string that have been all tied together, and then the whole thing has been tied into one massive convoluted Gordian knot. It's just, and the shape of the protein is something that is used, and then the protein is then sent off to be used somewhere in the body. It's used to make to do things inside cells. There are proteins inside cell walls, or not cell walls. That's for plants. Cell membranes. In cell membranes, you do have proteins as well. Transport proteins. Proteins do all sorts of things in the cell, and in the body. They're also used to digest. Those are enzymes. And again, there's some things that have been said about live enzymes in some of these, some things. Enzymes are not alive. They're proteins. But I do understand what you mean by that. They're catalysts to the chemical reaction of digestion, and so, or to other chemical reactions, whatever it might be. For our enzymes, generally speaking, what most people think of, they're catalysts for digestion or catalysts for chemical reactions in the plant foods. Right? So, live enzymes aren't alive. They're proteins, but nevertheless. Side note, not a huge issue. Um, Different sources of protein have different amino acids. There are two sources of protein, basically. Animal proteins and plant proteins. Animal proteins have their amino acids have more harmful components than plant proteins. Things like phosphorus. That's a huge thing in animal protein. There are some plant proteins that all proteins have phosphorus, or most proteins have at least some phosphorus. But animal proteins, there's more phosphorus in them, generally speaking, because of the kind of amino acids that animal proteins have. And there's a lot that goes into protein, and let me put it this way. Plant protein, there's a huge myth here, and actually let me cover this here. Animal protein, as I mentioned before, has been linked with more disease than any other dietary substance. And it has been linked with diseases, with tons of diseases, more conclusively than smoking tobacco has been linked with lung cancer. There has been, one study alone, the China study by Dr. T. Colin Campbell, contains over 70 years worth of collected research. It is astonishing just how much research is there. They have research of a general population, and that's not the only study that's going on. The Blue Zone studies are showing that, hey, guess what? The less animal foods you eat, the less animal protein you eat, the longer you live. There's all sorts of studies like that showing. And it's incredible. There are more and more and more studies coming out almost daily that prove that animal protein is much worse for you than plant protein. On top of that, there's a common misconception that is out there. I haven't run into it, honestly, as much here in California, probably because we're at least a little bit more, there's more education here on foods and things like that. But there seems to be a common misconception, especially in Europe and maybe also in places east of California. There tends to be a misconception that you need animal protein to survive, or that animal protein is better than plant protein. This is an absolute falsehood. Plant proteins provide all the essential amino acids that you need. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. There's no such thing as an incomplete protein. This is something that has been perpetuated. It's a myth that has been perpetuated consistently. When I went into my dietetics course, knowing already that this wasn't true, my dietitian professor told the class that plant proteins are incomplete proteins, that you need to combine proteins. This is something that has been proven false by study after study after study. It's a misconception. You don't need to worry about combining proteins. That said, you do need variety, and that's important. So don't get me wrong, variety is important, but combining proteins like rice and beans and things like that, there's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong. It's not going to hurt you. In fact, if you eat rice and beans, it's very good for you, but you don't need to combine protein. You can have rice or beans for a day and you'll be fine. You won't be protein deficient. It's a common misconception, but grains of all sorts, legumes of all sorts, and leafy greens of all sorts are all perfectly sufficient sources of protein. As a matter of fact, one leafy green in particular is very, very high, and that's stinging nettle. Now, people go, oh, wait. You eat something called stinging nettle? Yes, I do. In fact, it's in that soup that I made. And now, granted, it's from the tea thing. You make tea with it as well. But I do, and actually it's getting that time of year, at least around here and where I live, because we don't have winter really. I mean, those what other people call winter. And we're just about ready to enter into springtime here for this area. But yeah, I do go out and I harvest nettles, and they're great. And they're full of protein, they're full of nutrients. It's just amazing. But there are other leafy greens also that are great sources of protein. Broccoli, for example. Broccoli is an excellent source of protein, and gram for gram has more protein than beef does, which is incredible. It also is starchy, and as a matter of fact, most of your starches also are very, very good sources of protein. All your grains and your legumes, and especially leafy greens like broccoli, those are very good sources of starch and also great sources of protein. So, yeah. So again, grains, especially, and if you can't eat wheat, there's plenty of other grains that you can eat. If you can't eat wheat or if you can't eat gluten, oats and rice are still perfectly acceptable. Now, rice I don't think has as much protein as like oats. Actually, is amazing. Oats has some wonderful protein. I think oats are like the perfect grain. Oats and potatoes, you go with those two, you can't go wrong. That's my opinion. If you can't really do potatoes, that's okay. There's other things as well. Now, there's a lot of misconceptions as well that I might go into with certain things. I might do some presentations on diabetes in the future. I think I will, just because diabetes and blood sugar issues and things like that. I might very well do that. But bear in mind, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a physician. I am going through training. I am going to school to become a licensed medical herbalist in Ireland and other parts of Europe, but that won't apply here in the United States. And I'm not completed with that training yet. So again, speak with your physician before you do anything. Make any drastic changes to your diet. And in fact, I would say make these changes slowly. It's really, really important. Now, a lot of people might expect that that this section would be, oh well, you don't do this and you don't do that. That's not how a diet works. And it's one of my favorite sayings. I heard it from, I think it was a cousin of mine who told me about it, and he has a green thumb. I don't. I can harvest the plants. I can tell you where to find them and how they grow and things like that. I just can't tell you how to grow them yourself. But he has a green thumb, and he told me you cannot grow a garden by pulling weeds. And that's very true of habits, and it's also true of your diet. You can't have a good diet by not eating things. So it's really important to know what you should have instead. Most people think, oh, well, I can't have this, I can't have that. If I go vegan, what am I going to eat? Salad? Well, first of all, salad's great. Have you ever tried watercress? Oh, man. But on top of that, right, and now, mind you, I eat less salad than I should. Although I did get some watercress, actually, again, as well as just some mixed greens as well. But salad, there's so much more to vegan food than salad. I mean, goodness sake, a baked potato is vegan if you put hummus on it instead of butter or sour cream. Come on now. Baked potato and hummus. Amazing. My family, they just take garlic, minced garlic, and just put it in their potato and mash it all in together, and hey, there you go. You don't need sour cream, you don't need butter. You just got garlic and potatoes and a little salt. Hey, that's great. I actually haven't tried that, come to think of it. I need to try that. We don't eat... Yeah, anyway. Don't need to worry about that. And that being said, right, know what to eat. Whole grains, legumes, leafy greens, fruits, and other vegetables as well. Root vegetables, starchy root vegetables, non-starchy root vegetables. Actually, there's not very many non-starchy root vegetables. Roots are kind of starchy by default. But regardless, right? Root vegetables, leafy greens, flowers. Eat flowers. So many people don't know you can eat flowers. There's edible flowers out there, guys. Goodness, rose petals. Don't go out and pick them from something that's been probably sprayed with pesticides, but you can eat roses. You can eat rose petals, you can eat marigolds, you can eat all sorts of things. You can eat dandelion flowers. There's so much that we just don't do, right? Now, be wise. Look at these things. If you have an allergy, obviously don't do it, right? And look at how to prepare them or how to use them, because some of them are kind of bitter. Marigolds are kind of bitter. Dandelions are kind of bitter if you don't prepare them the right way. Of course, those are the same family. But we do have lots of foods that we have. Artichokes are flower heads. They're flower buds. And broccoli is the flower stalk. And so is cauliflower. So, But, yes. Anyway, that being said, I believe that's all I have. So I'm going to open things up for questions now. Oh, I forgot. Protein contain. Oh, yes. Before I do that, protein contains 4 calories per gram, and you should really have around 10 to 12% of your diet be protein. And it's really important that you do that, because proteins, again, you don't need very much. You want to spare your protein. You don't want to burn protein as fuel. You always will burn a little bit, but you want to spare your protein. So you actually want to have as little you want to have the least amount of your diet be protein, right? And so if you are, for example, if someone is, I'm just going to give this as an example, somebody who is who has maybe heart disease or something like that, or cardiovascular issues, maybe want to try 80% carbohydrates. Now that's high fiber, high starch, low simple sugar, right? We're not talking fruit, we're talking like sweet potatoes and beans and things like that, and lentils and such. And on top of that, and then after that 80%, then you're going to want 10% fat, 10% protein. That's about what you should, that's just an example of something, of a diet for a particular case. Now, again, you're going to want things, you're going to want to do things more tailored to you. And that's not always the case. It's because not every diet is going to fit. And not every food is fit for every person. Some people can't eat beans. Some people just don't like them. Some people don't like the texture or the taste. There's other things, right? I love lentils. Some people don't like lentils. I don't understand them, but at the same time, I recognize that there are some people out there who don't like lentils or split peas or any of the wonderful things that, the wonderful legumes like that. But that's okay. There's black-eyed peas. Some people like lima beans. I'll eat them. I don't necessarily like them, but I'll eat them. But there's all sorts of beans, right? All sorts of things. All sorts of beans. You can have whatever kind of beans that you like. Even pinto beans are great. So, do what works for you. If you can't eat something, then don't eat it, right? Eat something else. That's the thing. And experiment. Try new things. So few people actually do that. For goodness sake, if I wasn't going to try new things, I wouldn't be going out and harvesting stinging nettle and eating it, cooking it and eating it, because, oh my goodness, it is so good. But I would never have known if I hadn't had it. Now, again, you're going to want to actually look at it, look at recipes and things like that and how to prepare it, how to harvest it. For me, I have a big old knife that I use to harvest it, and and I only use the leaves because I've tried using the stems and they're really fibrous and not much good, but if you use the leaves, it works fine. And so, anyway, experiment, try new things. Don't be afraid to try new things. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and leave it now at the question and answers. So if you have any questions, please do leave them in the chat now. Of course, if you are new here or anything like that, if this is your first time watching, or if you're watching via the recorded video and you have a question, leave it in the chats. I would be happy to answer you, and I will get notifications for that. So yeah, I will be more than happy to answer you. And while I'm talking, you can still submit this, so please do. Please get this out there. Share it. There's so much information in here that's, I really feel strongly impressed that this is very important stuff. There's so many misconceptions about diet. There's so many misconceptions about lifestyle. And that's why acronyms are so important in looking at lifestyle principles, and that's kind of why we've gone over this. This is the last presentation of our healthy lifestyle, the restored acronym. I'm going to put this, once this is up on YouTube and such, I'm going to put it all in one playlist, and healthy lifestyle, the restored acronym. So do check that out as soon as it's done. And yes, absolutely. So that being said, if you have, if you enjoyed this, if you really liked this, or if you thought the information was good, do hit that like button, either on Facebook or on YouTube, or if you're really feeling generous, both. Do both. And also, if you're on, share it, get it out there. Hit the subscribe button and the notification bell as well. If you're on YouTube, and if you're on Facebook, hit the like on the page as well. Please share this stuff. Please get it out there. We really, really need to. It's just so important. So that being said, I'm not seeing any questions at this time. So that being said, we're going to go ahead and I think close out. But I'm going to give it a couple more here just in case it's a really long question. So yes, and again, I do want to say here, please join us as well for our other presentations I do on Saturdays. I do a Sacred History. We're right now at 10 o'clock in the a.m. Pacific Standard Time, where we're doing Sacred History. This is right now we're covering the history of medicine, more specifically Western herbal medicine. Really, really an important and interesting topic. So please do check that out. Join us then. At 11:15 a.m. Pacific Standard Time on Saturdays, we have a Bible study, and at 12:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, we are also having our bardic sessions where we do music and sacred music and poetry and things like that. Alrighty, well, it doesn't look like there are any more questions here, so we're going to go ahead and close things out. But that being said, yeah, let's bow our heads for a word of prayer, and I will see you guys on Saturday. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for your grace, for your mercy, for your love, for your kindness, and just for everything that you have done for us, and especially for Jesus. And Lord, thank you that you have given us principles of health and just of healing in your word. And I just ask, Lord, that you would please work in us and give us the power to be able to do these things. Help us to rely on Jesus for these, to make any changes that we need, and to give us wisdom as well, and to know what to do. Thank you so much, Lord, for everything once again, and I just ask that you would please be with us and keep us until we should meet again. Thank you so much. In Jesus' name we pray and ask all these things. Amen. Alrighty, I do want to say here, I just occurred to me, if you have any questions or any thoughts or anything like that, reach out to me, message me. You can message me on Facebook, on YouTube as well. I don't really go on my Twitch much, so I probably won't see you there. But yeah, again, that's the King's Bard at Facebook and at YouTube, so please do check that out. If you have questions, if you want kind of maybe a little bit of information, or if you want any kind of discussion, maybe some advice or recommendations on things, then please do get in contact with me. I would be more than happy to give you my advice. Just keep in mind, I'm not a healthcare professional here in the United States, and I'm only in training as one overseas. So I do have knowledge, I do have some experience, but bear in mind, speak to your physician first before doing anything. That being said, I don't want to hold things off any longer. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here. I will see you guys on Saturday, Sabbath, at 10 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. So, thank you, everybody, and God bless.